British weapons are being used by Saudi Arabia to bomb civilians in Yemen. That, says Oxfam, makes Britain a violator of the very arms treaty it backed to protect human rights. Good evening. The aid agency Oxfam has levelled one of the most serious accusations it can at the British government, that it has gone from being one of the biggest supporters of the International Arms Trade Treaty to one of the biggest violators of it. The charge is over British arms sales and training to Saudi Arabia, which has used them in its war against rebel-held parts of Yemen, where thousands of people have been killed and millions are suffering from malnutrition.
Also tonight, a stand-up row over empty seats.
Today, this train is completely ram-packed.
Last week, Jeremy Corbyn told us how he was forced to sit on the floor of a train because he couldn't find a seat. Today, Virgin Trains fought back with footage of Corbyn's carriages seemingly ram-packed with unoccupied seating. Has this derailed his mission to renationalise the trains? From one Jeremy to another. Remember this?
You are 15% more likely to die if you're admitted on a Sunday.
Jeremy Hunt used the perils of weekend hospital care to make the case against junior doctors during their strike. Now we can reveal exclusively that his own department has told him to pipe down because it's not helping it create a 7-day NHS. And the gender gap, it's narrowing according to a new report, but if a woman becomes a mother, it gets worse, 33% worse by the time the first child is 5.
I think you have to make sacrifices when you become a parent. And your career probably doesn't feel like it progresses as fast.
And is known anecdotally as flying while Muslim, being questioned by airport security or even taken off the plane because of your religion. Now, this family from London say they were simply looking at their phones when other passengers raised questions about them.
We were humiliated, we were embarrassed, we were treated like criminals, dragged off a flight in front of everyone.
There's a simple principle to the Arms Trade Treaty. If you know your weapons will be used against civilian targets, don't sell them. That's why Oxfam claims the British government position on weapons sales to Saudi Arabia is morally bankrupt. Tomorrow, the Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson is in Riyadh for talks about, amongst other things, Yemen, where the war has intensified this month. But is he, as Oxfam says, in denial and disarray over weapons sales to Saudi Arabia? I recently returned from Yemen for a Channel 4 Unreported World documentary to be shown next month. We looked at the impact of the Saudi-led coalition's bombing of rebel-held Yemen and how it's affecting civilians. There are some upsetting images in my report. The Saudi-led bombing of rebel-held Yemen has reached a new ferocity in recent days. Dozens have been killed in airstrikes on civilian homes, schools, factories, and this hospital in the north, supported by the charity Doctors Without Borders. In a year and a half, at least 6,000 people have been killed, with Saudi forces using billions of pounds worth of British jets and weapons. And as I discovered last month, the destruction of infrastructure and food supplies has caused humanitarian disaster, with hundreds of thousands of children almost starving to death.
I think the plane came from this way, this side.
In the port of Hodeidah in the south, Jamal Thabit showed me how his food businesses have been destroyed. This is an airstrike. Thabit operates many industrial plants here, but it's the dairy and cooking oil sites that were bombed.
We were hit with 5 missiles. At one time, it was one of the major cooking oil factories in the country. And as you see now, the whole thing was destroyed.
25 workers died in a fire that raged for 3 days. We drive to the port, and suddenly it's obvious why food imports have been so disrupted. So all of these were hit? All. The Saudi-led airstrikes hit the port here in Hodeidah really badly. They've taken out 2 of these major storage depots which were used for civilian food supplies, but the most damaging attack was on the cranes that unload the ships. 5 of them were systematically destroyed. The Saudis say they were bombing military targets, claiming the rebels had weapons here. Their naval blockade means cargo ships have to wait offshore to be checked, making unloading painfully slow. What's been done here is truly shocking. This port serves 70 to 80% of the imports coming into Yemen, a country almost entirely dependent on imported food. There's no way you could possibly disable this port without knowing it would have a catastrophic effect on food supplies for ordinary civilians. The port manager's team believe British and American weapons may have been used here. They gathered as many of the bomb fragments as they could to show me. There weren't any serial numbers remaining, but we've shown these images to Human Rights Watch and other weapons experts who say they could be parts of either Paveway 4 or Paveway 2 guided bombs made in Britain and America, respectively. Britain is understood to have sold more than 2,000 Paveway 4s to Saudi Arabia last year, and Human Rights Watch have documented their use in this city before.
The strongest evidence we've seen has actually been in Hodeidah. It was from a bomb that was dropped in 2016 on a hangar containing food, containing rice. And the markings we could see afterwards indicated that bomb was manufactured in the UK in May 2015.
2 weeks ago, the Saudi-led coalition admitted to what it called 2 shortcomings in 2 out of 8 cases in which civilians had been hit. But campaigners argue there are now so many such cases that Britain must stop selling weapons to the Saudis. Amid more evidence of civilian casualties, the US said it is scaling down help to the Saudi armed forces over Yemen. But Britain is still involved in both targeting and weapons supply. The question is, how long can it go on saying it doesn't know whether Saudi Arabia is hitting civilians? We did ask BAE Systems, who export arms to Saudi Arabia, to provide a spokesperson for interview, but they declined, saying the rules around arms exports are a matter for the Foreign Office and the Ministry of Defence. So we spoke to those government departments, but no ministers were available to speak to us. The Foreign Office said it operates one of the most robust arms export control regimes in the world. I'm joined now by Sally Copley, Oxfam's Director of Policy and Campaigns, and from the New Forest, Sir Desmond Swayne, who was a minister in the Department for International Development until last month. Sally Copley, they say one of the most robust regimes in the world. You say disarray. Why?
Well, I think it's very clearly not one of the most robust systems. They're just not doing it. We've seen very clearly, stage by stage, over the last year, different instances where the government have said different things to Parliament. And the question is, how much do they know that they're saying the wrong thing? So just to give you some background, last November, the former Foreign Secretary said, if it is proven that the Saudis are breaking international humanitarian law, then we will stop the sale of arms to Saudi Arabia. In February, a written answer to a question in Parliament said, we have assessed that there are not violations of international humanitarian law. And then the same government in July, at the very end of Parliament, the last day before recess, actually tabled 6 responses that said, sorry, we should have said, we have not assessed that there have been no violations of international humanitarian law. So we know very clearly that the government just isn't sitting in a clear position.
So Desmond Swayne, why didn't the government apologise for misleading or maybe even lying to Parliament over its position on Saudi Arabia?
Well, the statement was made in Parliament and the government made its position clear. The fact is that the law requires that arms should not be sold if there is a likelihood that they're going to be used to target civilians. So ministers have clearly got to make an assessment, that's for the Ministry of Defence and the Foreign Office, to the extent or the actuality of the Saudis having targeted, or even to what extent inadvertently they may have hit civilian casualties. I'm not in a position to make that judgment or to see the evidence. All I can make is the political point, and I've made this before, the notion that if we disarm the Saudis, the Yemeni people's suffering will cease and this war will end is a nonsense. The war is a consequence of the bloody removal by the Houthis of the legitimate government, backed by Iran.
If we don't sell them, somebody else will.
Look, the whole reason we have international law around this is that we need to stop the sales of arms to countries where they are being used to target, in a widespread and systematic way, civilians. 2/3 of the civilian casualties in Yemen are as a result of the bombs being dropped by the Saudi-led coalition. That is really clear. It's irrefutable. I think it's interesting that it's so difficult to find somebody today to defend the government's actions, and that's because they are indefensible. The evidence is sky high, not just from Oxfam, from the UN, from Human Rights Watch, from Amnesty International. We all know that's happening. The Saudis themselves have even said there have been 2 breaches in the last couple of weeks of international humanitarian law. Now, the real question is, why do we think that's possible? It shouldn't be possible. The whole idea, the whole reason the British government really pushed for this law to be made, really pushed for it to be ratified in the UK even, is because the only way you stop civilians being harmed and maimed in such atrocious numbers is if we actually all say we won't sell the arms to those perpetrating countries.
So, Desmond Swain?
Well, it's for ministers to make that assessment. But as I go back to the point, the fact is you have the 20-year dictator, Ali Saleh, of Yemen, in league with the Houthi administration, yesterday offering the military facilities of Yemen to the Iranians who back that regime. This is a much more complicated situation than simply blaming the Saudis and saying it's all down to them. There is a suggestion that much of the bombing has been done by the Houthis themselves. Indeed, that the damage to the cranes at
They killed their own side, did they?
may have been an inside job. No, that may have been an inside job.
That is one of the most cynical accusations to level.
Well, it's an accusation that is
throw
out
out
there.
a load of
I
chaff.
merely report
They might
what
be
is
killing
being said.
themselves.
No, they might be deliberately trying to tribute blame to the Saudis. Now, I'm not in a position as a minister to assess that evidence. What I want to come back to is this naivety that somehow we will end the war by disarming the Saudis. That is not the
Sally
case.
Copley.
Of course,
Yemen
our
is
law
already
must be applied.
Yemen is already a desperately poor country, but there are 6 children who are dying or being injured every day as a result of this war and as a result of those bombs coming from the Saudi-led coalition. We know that the population has already got 3/4 of people in need of humanitarian assistance. Half of the population is actually suffering from malnutrition and hunger. Now, that is the step before we start announcing famine. This is incredibly serious. It is prevalent. Nobody's saying it's
Why are you
simple, but
singling out Britain, though? France sells many more weapons to Saudi Arabia than Britain. America sells weapons to
And we are also raising issues with the Americans and with the French too, because this is the point of the treaty, is you stop the sale of arms to countries where they are being used in widespread and systematic attacks against civilians. And it is very clear that an awful lot of these attacks are happening at civilian targets. And we're not just supplying weapons, by the way, it's the military advice as well that we're giving.
So, Desmond, what's so strange is that the Americans now clearly are worried. They're pulling out most of their staff who are helping in the Yemeni campaign. Britain is still there. Even Saudi Arabia admits now that it's hit civilians and has made breaches of international humanitarian law. You seem to be the only person who denies it's going on.
No, I don't deny that there's a dreadful war going on and we must bring it to an end. And we're one of the principal donors bringing relief to those who are suffering, and our diplomatic efforts to bring the combatants to the negotiating table. That has to be the way forward. The point that I'm making is that just by blaming the Saudis and disarming the Saudis, you will not end this war. Nevertheless, British law is clear. Arms may not be sold if they are used to target civilians. That is an assessment for ministers to make.
So, Desmond Swain, thank you very much indeed. And Sally Copley, thank you for coming in. And you can see the full Unreported World documentary from Yemen on September the 30th. Matt.
Now, it's already been called Traingate. Jeremy Corbyn was filmed earlier this month sitting in the corridor of a Virgin train service from London to Newcastle, claiming that he could not get a seat on the ram-packed train and calling for renationalisation of trains. But Virgin today issued a statement backed by images from CCTV footage saying that Mr. Corbyn had walked past empty, unreserved seats before filming his comments. He was eventually shown to a seat by a member of staff. Mr. Corbyn's holding a leadership rally in East London tonight, and Kieran Jenkins is there. So, what did you have to say, Kieran?
Well, Jeremy Corbyn hasn't actually arrived here yet. If he does, we'll obviously try and bring him to you. But you might think we're bonkers even for discussing this. Did Jeremy Corbyn sit on the floor of a train when he could have had a seat? Well, there's a smidgen of a bigger picture, and that is that when those images were released, it was rather good PR for Mr Corbyn, the sort of PR that attracts crowds in their droves to events like this. So Jeremy Corbyn is an almost saintly figure with integrity and authenticity that other politicians simply don't have. Now, if that were to be undermined, well, of course, it's a big deal. The problem is, it's not nearly that clear-cut.
This is a problem that many passengers face every day on the trains, commuters and long-distance travellers. Today, this train is completely ram-packed.
Here's Jeremy Corbyn sat on the floor just like the rest of us. Not PR, but further proof, said his supporters, of his authenticity, Jeremy being Jeremy. Or was it? Virgin Trains have images of that journey too. CCTV of the 11 a.m. from London to Newcastle, August 11th. They say at 11:07, Jeremy Corbyn walked past empty, unreserved seats in Coach H. A minute later, he passed empty but reserved seats in Coach F. Virgin Trains claim it was then that he filmed that notorious video.
The reality is there's not enough trains, we need more of them, and they're also incredibly expensive. Isn't that a good case for public ownership?
In all, just 35 minutes passed before Jeremy Corbyn returned to the unreserved, empty seats in Coach H and, says Virgin Trains, sat down with more than 2 hours of his journey remaining. In response, this video was shared this afternoon by the Corbyn supporting writer, producer, rapper who was with him. Charles B. Anthony has been elaborating on his original Guardian article which broke the story. He tweeted that Mr Corbyn sat down after people got off the train. Well, here's video, says Virgin Trains, of Mr Corbyn taking a seat before the train made a single stop. Mr Corbyn was heading that day to the Labour leadership hustings in Gateshead. With him on that journey was an activist who his team have suggested we speak to.
And we walked through the carriage, through every carriage on the train, and there were no seats available. So what might not be clear from the CCTV footage is that there was children sitting on some of the seats, so you might not be able to see their heads above the top of the seats, or luggage that was reserving the seats for other people. There was simply nowhere for us to sit.
Mr Corbyn certainly sat on the floor. Other passengers sat with him. They too observed a busy service. An embarrassment? Maybe. Does it matter? Maybe not. Corbyn's campaign is probably still on track. Well, Jeremy Corbyn has now entered the building. He had nothing to say about Traingate. So is this a problem for him? Well, yes, in the sense that it's another chaotic episode in an already chaotic leadership contest. No, his supporters would say in the sense that this is a politician riding standard class among the people who vote for him. What's the big deal?
Kieran, thanks very much. Krish.
Now, the Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, has been told by officials to stop warning of dangers to patients from inadequate staffing of hospital accident and emergency departments at weekends. In a further leak of documents from inside the Department of Health to this programme, senior civil servants say that if he really wants to implement a 7-day service, he should stress the benefits rather than playing up risks that the public don't believe. Here's our health and social care correspondent, Victoria MacDonald.
It's called the weekend effect, a disputed statistical claim that patients admitted at the weekend are more likely to die than those taken into hospital during the week.
You are 15% more likely to die if you're admitted on a Sunday. If you have a stroke at the weekends, you're 20% more likely to die. That can't be acceptable. It's not acceptable to have mortality rates at the weekend that are 11 to 15%.
Statistics central to the Health Secretary's argument for a 7-day NHS in England and the reason given for changing the junior doctor's contract.
Okay.
But now Jeremy Hunt has been delivered what appears to be a rap over the knuckles by his own civil servants.
Channel 4 News and the Guardian newspaper have been leaked a series of documents from health officials in which they warn the government about their plans for a 7-day NHS. Now, in this latest leak, there is a clear message from those same civil servants to ministers. Stop talking about the weekend effect.
The document from the 7-day services governance group says
The link to the weekend effect has not been helpful for 7-day service, as our insight tells us that patient safety is not top of mind for the public or the workforce.
It goes on to say that they need to talk about the benefits of 7-day services, including the provision of high-quality care, convenience and access. As we reported last night, civil servants have warned the government there is a risk of failure, that they may not meet the 2020 deadline because of lack of funds, staff, data and evidence. Now there are growing calls for an inquiry into the government's plans.
I think there needs to be an inquiry. Jeremy Hunt appeared to deliberately flouted the advice of his officials, and there definitely needs to be a moratorium on both the introduction of a 7-day NHS and forcing the junior doctors to sign these new contracts.
In the same leaked document, civil servants also warn
the current financial context means we need to demonstrate that the 7-day service is achievable and realistic.
We have consistently warned this government that actually they needed to come out with a clear plan of how we were going to achieve 7-day services. And so what we have in effect is a lot of words or sound bites that says we will deliver 7-day services without a concrete plan of how that will be delivered, and the discussion that it will require more resources, whether that's staff or money.
A Department of Health spokesman said,
"The benefits of a 7-day service for patients are wide-ranging. A safer NHS, more choice and better access to services. But we make absolutely no apology for prioritising patient safety."
But what civil servants also say in their advice to Mr Hunt is there is as yet no evidence one way or another that a 7-day service will achieve that very aim, making the NHS safer.
In the military jigsaw that is Syria's civil war, the Kurds have proven to be an effective military force. But for them, there are enemies on all sides. Kurdish forces have consolidated their grip on Syria's northeast today, taking near complete control of Hasaka. There, they've been clashing with the Syrian regime. But a fortnight ago, it was Islamic State they drove out of a place called Manbij. Their progress has caused great alarm in Turkey. Here's our international editor, Lindsay Hilson.
The Syrian government is keen to show its air power and that of its Russian allies. They're fighting to retake the military academy in Aleppo, seized by rebels earlier this month. The fighting is intense. The regime needs a victory. In Hasaka to the northeast, Kurdish militia have regime targets in their sights. This is something new. They never fought Assad's troops before. Today they were celebrating as they've taken most of the town. The Kurds are trying to carve out their own territory in Syria and Turkey, and they'll fight the Islamic State, President Assad and the Turks if need be. Today, the Kurds agreed a truce with the Syrian regime in Hasaka. They've been fighting for a bigger Kurdish area shown in purple. Islamic State territory in grey is shrinking. The Kurds have now driven them out of Manbij. Next, they want to take Jarablus from IS. But the Turks will try to prevent the Kurds from getting contiguous territory. And IS will fight hard to retain their last supply line from Turkey. The loudspeaker instructs, stay at home on the ground floor because of mortar attacks. The town of Karkamis over the border in Turkey was attacked today.
I was harvesting maize on a tractor. We heard the sound. We were terrified and hid under the engine. Shrapnel fell on us.
Some people are fleeing. The mortars came from Jarablus, where Islamic State is in control. Turkey fired 40 shells back across the border today. Free Syrian army troops crossed from Syria into Turkey earlier this week. The Turks are expected to help them fight in Jarablus, not just to drive out IS, but to make sure that the Kurds don't get the territory and the glory. A makeshift hospital in Hasaka. Shifting alliances mean little to the victims of this complex, fragmenting, seemingly endless war.
طلعنا بالشارع شفنا أولادنا والثري كانوا يلعبون مثل العيد عندهم طلعنا نص ميتين ونص مخطرين.
There are so many factions now, backed by so many different countries, it's hard to keep track, let alone make peace. The only constant is the agony of Syria's civilians.
Lindsay Hilson. Well, as we've heard, the Syrian army and its allies have intensified their attacks on positions inside Aleppo, with civilians inevitably getting caught in the crossfire. The United Nations has called for a 48-hour ceasefire to allow in vital aid. Well, earlier I spoke to the advisor to the UN Special Envoy to Syria, Jan Egeland, and I asked him, when will that much-promised 48-hour ceasefire actually begin?
I hope it will happen very soon. I am disappointed we haven't gotten it yet. We need 48 hours of a ceasefire to enable trucks to be rolling into both eastern Aleppo and western Aleppo, because the whole city is now engulfed in this terrible war, but also virtually encircled by enemy fighters.
What about the Russian position in all this? Because Russia has been bombing Aleppo until today still, but the Russians have also said that they want a ceasefire. So where exactly do they stand?
Well, they say that they have responded to our UN call for the 48 hours pause in saying that, yes, we're willing to grant you that. We are willing now to sit down with you and look at the details.
But when the Russians say that they want a ceasefire in order to alleviate the humanitarian situation in Aleppo, do you believe them?
I must confess, I think they need to do more to help us reach the civilian population and be less concerned of the other side potentially winning a few feet of ground in their offensive, counter-offensives.
I mean, there's a real danger here, isn't there, Mr. Egeland, that Aleppo will become as much of a byword for the brutality and unbelievable atrocities against civilians of this war as Srebrenica was for, let's say, Bosnia, only that Aleppo is on a much bigger scale because it's such a huge city.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. There is not even a danger. I think it was a symbol of international impotence at the time. And Aleppo is another symbol of our impotence. Here we are again.
Does it frustrate you as a senior official of the United Nations that you represent an organization that is effectively impotent as a ringside observer in this appalling atrocity?
Well, yeah, it affects me every day and every night, but I cannot give up. I mean, the worst thing we can do now is say, this is a lost cause. We're impotent, let them fight it out.
But there will be people who say, forgive me for interrupting, what is the point? What is the point of the United Nations if all the United Nations can do is be a ringside observer in something like this?
But we're not ringside observer. The United Nations is the one that has made this impulse for the 48-hour pause, which will, I think it will happen. It will happen. If we hadn't done anything, there would only have been the guns speaking, and there would have been no relief going anywhere. We represent the hope in all of this, and we need help. I mean, we need help from the governments of the world, really. They need to help us. They are responsible for not doing more.
What about the UK? Is the UK doing enough to help?
The UK can do more on pushing the parties, I think, yes. It's a Security Council member. We can all do more.
Jan Egeland, thank you very much.
Now, new figures from the Institute for Fiscal Studies show that the pay gap between men and women is coming down from an average 28% in 1993 to 18% now. But they also suggest that once women start a family, the gap rises further and further until it reaches 33% by the time the child is 12. Our social affairs editor, Jackie Long, has this.
Meet Leo and his big sister, Rosa. Their mum, Rebecca, doesn't need a report to tell her about the gender pay gap. She's living it.
Well, my partner and I have similar jobs and similar levels of seniority. I wanted to go back part-time because I didn't want the children to be in childcare sort of full-time, and I wanted to spend more time with them. So obviously, as I've been a part-time worker and also taken 2 years out of my working life to have children, then obviously his salary has increased while mine hasn't, purely because of the logistics of that.
And how do you feel about that?
That's an interesting question. I've had a choice to go 3 days a week, but sometimes it can feel unfair, I suppose.
For other parents at the playgroup today, the idea of paying a price for taking time out at work to look after children came as little surprise.
I actually just really enjoy being a mum, but it's not surprising, I don't think, but it is a shame.
But a fact of life, you think, that can't be changed?
That's
or won't be changed?
Hopefully it will be changed when you see more fathers taking part and getting paternity leave and everything.
Do you think that would make a difference?
Oh yeah, absolutely, massively, definitely.
For most women, it's not that they're paid less per hour when they return to work part-time. It's much less blatant than that. It is that over the years following the birth of their first child, their pay continually lags behind that of men. It rises less quickly, and they're much more likely to be overlooked for promotion. The report says in the end, that can have a massive impact on their earnings.
The Institute for Fiscal Studies says the gap in average hourly wages between men and women is falling. Currently, hourly pay rates for women are around 18% lower than for men. The pay gap starts to widen after their first baby is born. Women lose on average 2% in their earnings for every year they stay out of work. Over the 12 years after their first child, their hourly pay rate lags behind until it is on average 33% less than men. But some analysts questioned the IFS figures, saying any pay gap is nothing to do with gender.
For men and women, if they take time out of work, that will inevitably reduce their career opportunities and their pay increase opportunities, whether that be for familial reasons or for a more work-life balance. When you then come back into the working world, I think you have to expect that those pay opportunities are going to be less than what would have been if you'd stayed in.
Just tough?
Yeah, I think so. Well, not tough. I think it's more a case of it's an individual choice, and they're positive choices.
Making sure little girls have the chance to earn the same as men when they grow up is a priority, say the government. Next year it will begin forcing larger employers to reveal how much men and women are paid and where the biggest gaps are.
Jackie Long. Now, if you know of any drug addicts, go and kill them yourselves, as getting their parents to do it will be too painful. The chilling words of Rodrigo Duterte, the president of the Philippines. It seems as if his supporters, in and out of uniform, have been taking him by his word. The Philippines police chief told a Senate hearing today that more than 1,900 people have been killed since Duterte's election in May, 750 of them in police operations, with the rest still under investigation. Our Asia correspondent Jonathan Miller reports on the Philippines capital Manila and the southern city of Davao, where Duterte cut his political teeth as mayor on the president's war on drugs. And I must warn you that you might find some of the scenes in his report highly distressing.
Amid a methamphetamine pandemic, a dirty war's erupted, sanctioned by the Philippines' new president. His orders to his people and his police: kill them, make my day. Midnight in Manila, and a vigilante hitman's taken out a suspected shabu dealer, the local term for crystal meth. We chase through the dark streets, a gun battle with cops reported down the road. In the 7 weeks since Rodrigo Duterte was sworn in, more than 1,900 people have been gunned down, a third by police, 2/3 by unknown balaclavaed killers. They call their president Duterte Harry. They like his style. The press can't get enough.
This is a legitimate bypass operation.
The police, licensed to shoot to kill, defend their operation but don't say much. 2 teenagers, he said, known druggies. They had been warned. Some hits are caught on CCTV, but the killers are never caught. Duterte vowed he would exterminate the scourge. There will be blood, he said, It wasn't bluster. Prisons are crammed with more than 600,000 addicts who've surrendered, fearing they'd be next, and 10,000 who've been arrested. Rehab facilities woefully inadequate. Jenilyn O'Leary's partner, Michael Sharon, was murdered by gunmen on a motorbike 4 weeks into Duterte's Operation Double Barrel. The president mocked these photographs as a parody of the virgin cradling Jesus body. Michael had occasionally smoked shabu and had been warned by police, his broken-hearted partner told me. He'd actually voted for Duterte. This afternoon, Jenilyn went to Michael's grave with his father and his sister. She told me she feels crippled.
I couldn't think of anything else to do but to cradle him. To find out if somehow he might still be breathing and whether we could still save him. I just wish these killings would stop. If only his death had ended all this. He's gone. He cannot speak for himself anymore.
Davao City, Mindanao, in the archipelago's far south. Davao's Duterte's city. He was mayor here for 22 years. Davao was his laboratory, his testing ground for tactics he's now deploying nationwide. The Harvest Festival is in full swing. Colonized by Spain and then the US, this mostly Catholic country feels like a little bit of Central America stuck on the wrong side of the Pacific. The drugs war and the reported arrival of a Mexican cartel has given that parallel an extra bit of edge. But it's actually President Rodrigo Duterte who has brought to the Philippines the darkest of Latino shadows, the death squad. And he did it first in Davao. During his time as mayor here, death squads meted out summary executions with impunity. Criminals, drugs dealers, street children were neutralized, to coin a Duterte term. Still, the man they also call the Punisher is wildly popular down here, but not with everyone. 4 of Clarita Alia's 6 children were murdered by the Davao death squads. First, Richard, who was 18. 3 months later, Christopher, 16. And 3 months after that, 14-year-old Bobby. 5 years went by before they killed Fernando, who by then was 15. Clarita claims the Davao police told her that her boys were on their hit list. She blames Duterte for their deaths.
I saw this coming. I warned the people he would do this nationwide. It really hurts me because it started with my sons. It saddens me that they are doing this everywhere now. We have to get rid of the drugs, not kill the people.
Rodrigo Duterte, whose daughter is now the mayor, claims he cleansed this place of violent criminals, but today Davao remains the murder capital of the Philippines. Philip Dizon is a Davao tycoon and best friends with the former mayor. I met him at his crocodile farm.
Even though he's not hungry, he will eat you. Because he is a predator. He is an opportunistic predator.
Crocodiles, he told me, get a bad press.
You think the crocodile has been demonized?
Yes.
And actually they're very good at getting rid of all the bad stuff?
Yes.
What does that remind you of?
Me and the president.
Is he a violent man? But he doesn't seem to have a problem in killing people who he considers pests and a nuisance.
Well, not pest, criminals. People that hurt other people must be hurt first before they hurt other people.
So is he misrepresented and misunderstood?
I believe so. It's just simply cleaning up the house. That's it.
Late that night, the president called a news conference. He turned up at 1:15 a.m. and spoke for 2 hours in defense of his war on drugs.
My job as president is to protect the innocent, law-abiding citizens. I was never tasked by any law to protect the life of criminals.
He lashed out at his critics at home and abroad, even threatening to pull the Philippines out of the UN, which has branded his war a crime under international law. At the risk of being shot down, the numbers of people who have been killed on the streets of the Philippines since you came to power 6 weeks ago have risen to around 1,000. Now, I know you have been contemptuous of your critics, but they are accusing you of unleashing a national death squad. Where is this going to end? Because some are saying that the social fabric of the Philippines is at risk here.
Good. That's a very good question. Because at the other past, in the distant past, no police was ever willing to really work and risk his life. So when I was mayor, I told them, go ahead, do your duty. But if you feel that you're in carrying out your duty, you will get killed. My God, shoot him first.
The Davao mayor turned president drove off in a pickup truck. Duterte Harry says it's straight and shoots from the hip. That's why they love him. Those who don't fear he's opened a Pandora's box.
Jonathan Miller reporting. Now, a disturbing story of our times, and it's happening more and more. 2 young Muslim sisters and their brother taken off a flight preparing to leave London's Stansted Airport last week after fellow passengers told staff they believed they were supporters of the self-styled Islamic State group. The three say they were questioned by armed police before being allowed back onto the plane when it was clear they were innocent travellers. They've been speaking to Asad Beg.
We were humiliated, we were embarrassed, we were treated like criminals, dragged off a flight.
It was supposed to be a summer getaway to Italy, but it was interrupted when these 3 siblings were questioned by armed police on the tarmac at Stansted Airport.
She looked at me directly and she said, I need you to come with me. So we just sort of stood up awkwardly, began to follow her towards the front of the plane, towards the cockpit, and immediately she took a sharp left out of the plane. And the first thing I saw at the bottom of the stairs were armed policemen, and yeah, it was just absolute shock.
Literally, the first thing we were asked was whether we spoke English, so we weren't offered any explanation immediately. I found that a bit patronising, a bit Orientalist almost, as if just because we're Muslim, we don't speak English. We're flying from London to Italy. But, and then, we were told that apparently the pair of us two had been reading ISIS material, so...
That's right, yeah.
What had you been reading?
Literally a WhatsApp conversation. I showed the timestamps on my phone. Me and my dad were talking about which left-wing leader Jeremy Corbyn most resembled from the past. So unless being left-wing is a crime, I don't know, that's literally the only offence I could have committed that morning.
Their brother Ali, however, wasn't questioned by the police.
Maybe I don't look typically Muslim. It's not easy for someone to look at me and be like, oh yeah, I can kind of guess what religion he is or where he's from. But because my sisters wear scarves, it's easy for them to be profiled.
And I think this shows kind of how Islamophobia has become racialised. It is a racist crime.
In a statement, Essex police said they were contacted
with reports of concern regarding the behaviour of 3 people who were looking at their mobile phones. Officers were quickly able to establish that no offences had been committed and the women boarded their flight. We are satisfied the call was of good intent.
EasyJet said,
The safety and security of its passengers and crew is our highest priority, which means that if a security concern is raised, we will always investigate it as a precautionary measure. We would like to apologise for any inconvenience caused to the passengers.
The Daras case isn't isolated. There's been a growing number of publicised incidents in what's become known as flying while Muslim, a term that highlights the discrimination faced by Muslim passengers at airports since 9/11. Some have been pulled aside for extra questioning, some have been searched by police, while others have been taken off their flights.
There are no official figures on incidents like this, but we've been told by Muslim campaign groups Mend and Tell Mama that they've seen an increase of anecdotal reports over the past 18 months. The Daras family are questioning why the people who made the accusations are not being held to account.
They got away with it with complete impunity. They reported us, it was a vicious lie, and they just got away with it.
Asa Beg reporting. Well, fears over security in Europe are running extremely high following a series of deadly terrorist attacks across the continent this summer. The head of the director of Europol, Rob Wainwright, has stressed the importance of intelligence sharing in fighting terrorism, but says that Brexit could make this more difficult for Britain. He joins me now. Do you still think that?
Potentially, yes. Of course, it depends on the outcome of the negotiations, Matt, but certainly there's some uncertainty now about Britain's future cooperation with its European neighbours on security, and I expect that a large part of that will lift through the negotiation, but let's wait and see.
I think you said before the vote that there would have to be a historic, a unique kind of treaty for Britain to be allowed to access the kind of data and intelligence that we've been accessing as members of the EU. Have the negotiations even started for that kind of renegotiation, that new treaty?
Well, Brexit already brings us into the environment of the unique because we haven't had a member state leaving before. So what I meant by that was that there are certain police cooperation mechanisms, such as the European arrest warrant, that doesn't yet allow access to a non-EU member state. So Britain will have to negotiate something special, and I'm sure that it'll intend to do that.
But have you had conversations along those lines already?
No, absolutely. It's not my place to speculate either. No, this is for the British government and senior EU officials to negotiate that. That's not my place. My place is to make sure that in the meantime, Britain's cooperation with the rest of the EU continues in the important work that we all have to do to fight terrorism, cybercrime and other forms of organised crime.
Now, in the summer you said there were 50 known cases of terrorism, large and small, that I think you were pursuing. Presumably those 50 cases did not include the Nice lorry attack or indeed the beheading of a priest in Normandy.
Well, it's true that the security authorities around Europe don't always have, of course, advance warning of some of these attacks. And it reflects this fragmented nature of the terrorist threat that we have at the moment, in the sense that we have thousands of people that are off the radar, running very low, who are quickly radicalised, and some of them pop up and carry out those terrible attacks that we've seen.
Can you put a number on that? I mean, how many cases are you worried about at this moment?
Well, I think we're dealing with thousands of people, certainly Europeans who have gone to Syria and Iraq that we're aware of. Some of them, about 1/3, have come back. Some of them have been responsible for the terrible attacks we saw in Paris and Brussels. But also there's many, many more stay-at-homes that are quickly radicalised.
That's really alarming, isn't it?
Well,
the idea of these DIY attacks.
Let's not call it that, but it's a very large community of disconnected people, the intelligence view of which isn't always complete, of course, making it very difficult for the authorities to get it right, making it very important, therefore, that we have maximum cross-border intelligence sharing.
I keep trying to bring you back to numbers. You say a very large community. Again, how many thousands are we dealing with there?
Some thousands. I don't know the exact number, Matt, of course, because a lot of it is unknown. I think we are dealing with less than 10,000, but still a lot of people that have either gone to Syria and Iraq or those that have stayed at home. Some of those that have stayed at home are very young, very often with a history of mental illness, for example, and as I said, are very quick to be radicalised.
And can intelligence sharing actually make a difference there?
Absolutely. But we have to broaden the scope of that intelligence sharing, not just between the intelligence agencies in Europe, which is very, very important work, of course it is, but also on a wider basis with more traditional police agencies, because we've seen an important new part of the profile of these suspects are their criminal background, and that's where Europol plays an important role in bridging the two.
And very briefly, I think your officers have been going around refugee camps, full of Syrian and Afghan refugees looking for potential terrorists. I mean, how's that going?
Well, one of the things we had to do, I think, is to send reinforced counter-terrorist experts to the major entry points, such as those in Greece, to help those authorities to stop the possible flows of jihadists coming through that way. Those flows, by the way, are still not very large, so let's not exaggerate it, but it is a threat that's out there.
Indeed, good point. Rob Wainwright, thanks very much. Krish.
Thanks, Matt. After the break, the Olympics are over, now for the Paralympics. Despite all the fuss over doping and lack of funds, Britain's Paralympians are gearing up for fierce competition in Rio. We meet the cycling team.
Britain's triumphant Olympians have arrived home to an emotional welcome from friends and family at Heathrow Airport. They'll soon be replaced in Rio by competitors for the Paralympics. The run-up to the Games has been overshadowed by talk of doping and spending cuts. But Britain will be there, and our sports correspondent Kamian Zeram has been down to Newport in South Wales to meet the Paralympics cycling team.
Gold upon gold upon gold. So many medalists, they couldn't even fit in the photo call. The British Olympic team. Hockey, rowing, the boxing ring. Unprecedented success. But as one Games ends, another is yet to begin. Their Paralympic counterparts still counting down. 2 weeks to go, still furiously training, the paracycling team, as news filtered through that the entire Russian squad would definitely be staying at home. Fated by President Putin, but banned by the International Paralympic Committee for benefiting from a state-supported doping program. Zero tolerance.
The fact that there is a state-sponsored doping program going on in Russia, and it was found out, and there were Paralympic athletes that are listed on that McLaren report, it was like 35, I think, that means it's happening.
The fight against doping, though, is a moral maze. For previous medalists like Karen Dark, this is a Games absent clean friends and respected foes.
I really feel for some of my competitors that I know personally. I've had some messages with them.
People that you trust, people you know are.
Yeah, well, obviously I don't ever know, but I trust that they are, and I know how hard they work, and I believe that they're clean, and it's really devastating for them and disappointing for me to not have them there.
One of my biggest competitors is Russian, and I was really looking forward to race against her because we bring the best out of each other. So it would have been a great run, but yeah, it's unfortunate, but there's nothing I can do to deal with that.
For the athletes, the challenge now is straightforward. Control the controllables, run their own races. But the Rio Paralympics have been plagued with budget problems amid fears some nations might not even have the money to attend. And with disappointing sales hovering around 15%, the real risk of empty stadia. Tonight, a web campaign goes live to mass crowdfund tickets for favela kids.
Whether it's kids in favelas, whether it's people from poor backgrounds that have been gifted tickets from people, or they just get people in. Like, it's better to have 6,000 people cheering at the top of the voice than 100 people cheering at the top of the voice. So if we can rent a crowd in, then that's all good for me.
And did London not put our Paralympians on the same pedestal as their Olympic colleagues? Max Whitlock relaxing on the plane home from Rio. Serenaded by the women's hockey team and their brand new gold medals.
That's it for tonight. And remember, my documentary, President Trump, Can He Really Win?, starts right here on 4 at 9 p.m.
Until tomorrow at 7, that's Channel 4 News. Have a very good evening.
Good night.